Now that you've got the core knowledge about CPUs down, let's roll up our sleeves and walk through installing a CPU together and explore some tips and tricks to make your PC build hassle-free. But before we begin, I just want to mention two things. Number one, make sure you're using ESD protection. I'm standing on an anti-static mat. We are covered. Number two, we are dealing with sensitive equipment here. These CPUs, you want to make sure as you're handling them that you do not touch the pins. And if you feel like you're going to touch the pins, go ahead and grab a glove. I think I'll be okay. Now, let's take a look at our CPUs and talk about their sockets. The first one I want you to take a look at here is our Intel i5. And if you look at the bottom of this actual connection mechanism is known as LGA, or Land Grid Array. You're going to find these in the majority of Intel CPUs that you deal with today. And if you notice, the CPU has flat connections on the bottom that makes a connection here with its socket. This is an LGA, and basically these flat traces sit on top of other flat traces here, and that's how we provide our connection for the CPU. Now, you might be wondering, while we're here, what this mechanism is right here. Well, this is actually called a zero insertion force socket. And this was needed because, I don't know if you see these holes around the motherboard, or around the CPU here, but back in the day, we used to actually have to screw heat sinks on, and sometimes if you weren't careful, you could crack the board. I ruined a few boards myself when I first started. So the industry got together and actually created this zero insertion force socket that really just beautifully cuddles the CPU in place and locks it down nice and easy with absolutely no torque or anything involved. So I just wanted to introduce that because we're going to actually install an AMD CPU over here on our open board. Now the difference is, if you take a look here, the AMD actually has pins coming out of it. You notice that along the side there. It doesn't have the flat LAN connections or the flat traces like the Intel CPU has. And these pins actually go into these little holes here in the socket. This is a pin grid array, or PGA socket. Again, we have a zero insertion force mechanism right here to lock the CPU down. And one more thing I want you to take notice of is that there is an orientation notch. Let me get that in there for you so you can see that. There's an orientation notch right here. You see that? There's a little arrow on the PCB, and then there's also a little dot right here. Well, that corresponds to your orientation notch on your CPU socket. So let's go ahead and see how that works. We're going to simply take our orientation notch and line it up with the one on the socket. We're going to notice the CPU slides right in beautifully, and we can use our ZIF, or zero insertion force socket, to lock it in place. Now, what happens if you plug a CPU in and things don't work quite right? Before we begin this, I want to stress to everybody, do not do this at home. I am going to bend a pin on this old AMD Sempron CPU. But I got to stress to you to please not do this at home. This will ruin your device, but this will help us demonstrate our troubleshooting steps that CompTIA wants us to know. So I'm going to go ahead, and if you can see that, I bent, get a good angle for you here. So let's go ahead, now that we've totally messed up this CPU, and practice CompTIA's troubleshooting theory steps to troubleshoot and hopefully resolve this issue. Step one is to identify the problem. Well, the problem in this case would probably be that, hey, the CPU doesn't fit in the socket because of those bent pins that you can see right here. And if the CPU did fit in the socket with bent or broken pins, it wouldn't work. So I'm going to guess step one is easy to solve, and we've identified our problem. These pins should not be bent. Now, step two is an interesting one because establishing a theory of probable cause really means questioning the obvious. And you're going to come to find out that in our industry, there is no jack of all trades anymore. No one person knows everything. So your theory could be wrong, right? I could have thought maybe it was a motherboard incompatibility or something, but luckily I checked the pins and I knew that that was actually what was wrong. Step three is to test the theory to determine the cause. Well, this one's going to be a little tough to test, but if I was able to bend the pins back in their perfect position and set it back in the motherboard, in its socket, and it worked, my theory is sound, right? But if the theory is not confirmed, then I need to reestablish a new theory or escalate it, or possibly seek out somebody else who may have already had this problem pop up before and solved it. Step 4 is going to be establish a plan of action to resolve the problem and implement the solution. And a key note here is that there are some hidden gems that you need to look at when you refer to the vendor's instructions for guidance. There is a lot of material in those. I know we open and unbox our stuff and toss those manuals to the side, but really you need to refer to those vendor's instructions because they have a lot of information here that will deal with things like that. Step 5 is we're going to verify full system functionality and, if applicable, implement preventive measures. Well, the only preventive measure that we could implement here would be to not let Steve have a flathead screwdriver next to the CPU, right? But we're already past that point, so what would I need to do would be to bend the pins back, stick them in the light socket, and make sure everything's good. We're going to go ahead and pretend that that happened. And so we verified full system functionality, and step 5 is complete. Our next and final step is step 6. Where we're going to go ahead and take out our notepad or jot down some notes in Notepad, and we're going to document the findings, our actions, and our outcomes. Not only what happened throughout the entire course of troubleshooting this issue, but also the different things we tried so that we have a running log if we ever encounter an issue like this in the future. We've got a great reference that we can go back and take a look at. And that's it. It really is that simple. Troubleshooting a CPU is as easy as following CompTIA's troubleshooting theory steps.